House members received an unclassified briefing last night about the status of military operations in Ukraine. And joining me now is Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher, a member of the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees and also an Iraq War veteran. Congressman, it's very good to see you again. So what is your reaction to what you heard last night and the sanctions that the president announced yesterday?
Well, first, on the good side, I think there's widespread support for the idea the president talked about of fortifying countries on the eastern front of NATO. I think that's absolutely something we need to do, as well as the president's willingness to point out that this indeed was not a minor incursion, that Putin seems to be going after the whole country. However, I would say there is bipartisan concern that the sanctions announced don't go far enough. The president seems unwilling to consider kicking Russia off the SWIFT system. And until we really go after the Russian energy sector, I fear there are loopholes big enough for you to drive a Russian tank through in this sanctions regime. And then finally, I would say I view the last few months as confirmation that this whole approach of relying on the threat of sanctions alone, combined with some sternly worded statements, it's failed. It's failed to deter Putin, so we need to learn from that failure. And I worry that what we saw yesterday, both in the president's speech as well as in the briefing afterwards, is that we still continue to put all our hope in this basket of sanctions alone. Until you put hard power in Putin's path, he's not going to back down. And I think his appetite will only continue to grow as he's successful on the ground.
Now, acknowledging that sanctions clearly do not deter, that's for sure, and also that the U.S. does not have control of the SWIFT system. It is a consensus, a European consensus, and Germany is blocking us there. So I don't know that, well, they say they could not do it. That said, what is the hard power that you think might work?
Well, a few things. I've encouraged the president to call us into an emergency session. We should be meeting this weekend to talk about what can Congress do working with the White House. The first, I believe there's more we can do to continue to provide more rapidly javelins, stingers, anti-tank weapons, anti-tank mines, particularly as the invasion proceeds from the north, from staging grounds in Belarus. The second thing is we talk about NATO frontline states on the eastern front of NATO. We really need to be deploying intermediate-range ballistic missile systems to NATO. I believe there's more we can be doing with the United States Navy as well to reestablish some semblance of control of the Mediterranean Sea and eventually the Black Sea. So I think we still have options. Putin wants a quick and painless victory. We need to turn this into a long, costly quagmire, something akin to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, which was initially a brilliant conventional move and then turned into an utter disaster that expedited the fall of the Soviet Union. Similarly, with a little bit of creativity and some bipartisan urgency, I think we can still turn this into a long-term embarrassing fiasco for Putin.
Well, speaking of things, fiascos for Putin, what about fiascos for people here at home? The Republican Party is so divided now, with former President Trump and Mike Pompeo praising Putin for being savvy, smart, a genius. That's now playing on Russian television as propaganda for them.
Well, I really don't think anything that's being said on the golf course at Mar-a-Lago has any connection to the current crisis. I mean, Trump's been out of office for a year now. I think we really need to be focusing on whether our approach, and I say our, I mean, it's the White House working with Congress, whether it's working. My contention, my argument is that it's not. We need to learn from that failure and not get distracted by anything else and work in a bipartisan manner to fix that failure. And I do think the Republican Party, though there's disagreement in both parties on whether we should have used more American combat power on the ground in Ukraine, whether the type of sanctions we need to put in place, I think at least there's agreement that our energy policy is totally counterproductive and misguided right now. I think the decision to allow Nord Stream 2 to go forward was disastrous. I think we need to be investing in domestic American energy production. And over the long term, that gives us an opportunity to wean our European friends off of their reliance upon Russian gas and Russian oil. So there's always disagreements on foreign policy within the party, but this should lay bare who we're dealing with. You know, in bipartisan fashion, I think presidents in both parties have underestimated Putin. They've underestimated his ruthlessness. They've underestimated the scope of his ambitions. We need to understand how we've gotten that wrong for nearly 2 decades now and make sure we don't continue to get it wrong going forward. We're dealing with some dangerous people, some barbaric thugs in a dangerous world, and ultimately American power is what guarantees the peace. That is what guarantees the peace. It's not statements out of Davos or getting disinvited from COP26. This is a very, very dangerous moment.